Sir? Are you okay? My car broke down.
What if one small decision made in the middle of a storm could quietly rewrite an entire life, without anyone noticing until it was too late to turn back? What if helping a stranger for just 5 minutes planted a seed that grew into something far bigger than money, fame, or gratitude? Tonight's story is not about miracles falling from the sky or riches appearing overnight, but about how kindness travels in circles, returning when you least expect it, and how one single dad discovered that the rainiest night of his life was actually the beginning of something extraordinary. Before we begin, if you believe real kindness still exists in this world, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel is Kindness True Stories, where every story reminds us that compassion still matters. Now let us begin. Part 1. Jake. Palmer had learned long ago that life did not slow down just because you were tired. At 36, he was already exhausted in ways sleep could never fix. A single father to a 10-year-old daughter named Lily, Jake lived paycheck to paycheck, working long shifts as a delivery driver while trying to be both mother and father at home. His old pickup truck, rusted at the edges and coughing like an old smoker, was his livelihood. Every dent had a story, every rattle a reminder that replacing it was a dream he couldn't afford. That night the rain came down hard, slicing through the darkness like silver needles, turning the highway into a shimmering ribbon of danger. Jake was driving back from a late delivery, shoulders tight, mind racing with unpaid bills, school fees, and the quiet fear that someday he might fail the one person who depended on him completely. He was thinking about Lily, about how she hated thunderstorms and probably had the lights on at home, pretending to be brave when he saw something that made his foot ease off the gas. On the side of the road, barely visible through the rain, stood an elderly man. He was hunched over, soaked to the bone, clutching a worn leather bag to his chest like it held his entire world. Cars sped past him, their headlights briefly illuminating his frail frame before disappearing into the storm. None slowing down, none stopping. Jake told himself he couldn't afford to stop. He was already late. The road was dangerous. He had his own problems. But something tugged at him, something quiet yet insistent. The same instinct that made him get up early every morning for Lily, even when his body begged him not to. He pulled over. The old truck groaned in protest as Jake stepped out into the rain, instantly drenched. "Sir?" he called, raising his voice over the storm. The man looked up, eyes wide with surprise and relief, as if he hadn't expected anyone to notice him at all. Up close, Jake could see he was in his late 70s, maybe older, his hands shaking, lips pale from the cold. "Are you all right?" Jake asked. The man nodded weakly, but it was clear he wasn't. His car, he explained in a trembling voice, had broken down miles back. His phone was dead. He'd been walking for over an hour, hoping to find help, but the rain had slowed him, drained him. Jake didn't hesitate. He opened the passenger door and helped the man inside, cranking up the heat as the old man sighed with relief, his entire body slumping like it had been holding itself together by sheer will. "Thank you," the man whispered. "You didn't have to stop." Jake shrugged, embarrassed. "Someone should." They drove in silence for a few moments, the rain drumming against the windshield. The man introduced himself as Henry Caldwell. His voice was gentle, educated, but tired. Jake dropped him off at a small roadside motel and helped him inside, even insisting on paying for the room when Henry protested weakly. "I'll pay you back," Henry said, eyes earnest. Jake smiled softly. "Don't worry about it. Just stay warm." Before leaving, Henry reached into his bag and pulled out a business card, pressing it into Jake's hand. "If you ever need anything," he said. Jake glanced at the card later after getting back into his truck. It had a name, a phone number, nothing else. No title, no company. Jake tucked it into the glove compartment, never imagining he would see the man again. To him it was over. Just a decent thing done on a bad night. He went home to Lily, who hugged him tightly, asking why his clothes were soaked. "Long story," he said, smiling, brushing her hair back as thunder rolled outside. Life went on, or so he thought. What Jake didn't know was that Henry Caldwell was not just an old man stranded in the rain. And he certainly didn't know that 6 months later, standing inside a struggling diner with a woman on the verge of losing her job, that same old man would step forward and quietly return the kindness that had once saved him from the cold. And this time, the consequences would be far greater than Jake could ever imagine. 6 months passed, and the memory of that stormy night faded into the quiet background of Jake Palmer's life, filed away among countless other moments where he had simply done what felt right without expecting anything in return. Life did not become easier. If anything, it pressed harder. Gas prices rose, delivery routes grew longer, and the old pickup required repairs Jake could barely afford. Some mornings, he sat behind the wheel before starting the engine, forehead resting against the steering wheel, whispering promises to himself that he would somehow keep things together for Lily. She was growing fast, asking bigger questions, needing more than he could always provide. But she never complained. That made it harder. On one grey Tuesday afternoon, after finishing his last delivery early, Jake decided to stop by Rosie's Diner, a small, worn-down place near the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, and Lily loved their grilled cheese. The diner had been there for decades, surviving on regulars and stubborn hope, but lately even that seemed to be slipping. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fried onions, and the bell above the door chimed softly as Jake and Lily walked in. Behind the counter stood Emma Brooks, a young waitress with tired eyes and a forced smile. She was efficient, polite, and always kind to Lily, sneaking her an extra cookie when no one was looking. That day, though, something was off. Emma's hands shook slightly as she poured coffee, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Jake noticed because he paid attention to people the way someone who had once needed help himself often did. While Lily colored quietly at the table, Jake overheard a hushed conversation near the kitchen. The owner, Mr. Harris, was speaking in a low, irritated tone. "I can't keep you if numbers don't improve," he said. "One more complaint, one more mistake, and that's it." Emma's voice cracked as she apologized, promising she was doing her best. Jake felt a familiar knot tighten in his chest. He knew that fear, the fear of losing the only thing standing between you and nothing. When Emma brought their food, Jake hesitated, then spoke gently. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded too quickly. "Just a rough day." He didn't push. Some pain didn't want questions. Over the next few weeks, Jake found himself coming to Rosie's more often. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Lily. Not because the food was special, but because he sensed the place itself was holding on by a thread. Regulars whispered about the diner closing. Fewer customers came in. Emma worked harder than anyone, picking up extra shifts, staying late, never complaining. Yet it never seemed enough. Then one afternoon, the bell over the door rang, and an elderly man stepped inside, impeccably dressed. Raincoat neatly folded over his arm, despite the clear sky outside. Jake was sitting at the counter when he felt something stir in his memory. The man's posture, the way he carried himself, it was familiar. When the man removed his hat, Jake recognized him instantly. Henry Caldwell? The old man from the rain. Henry's eyes scanned the diner before landing on Jake, and for a moment, surprise flashed across his face, followed by a warm, knowing smile. He walked over slowly and extended his hand. "I was hoping I'd see you again," he said. Jake stood stunned. You're all right," he managed. Henry chuckled softly. "Thanks to you." They sat together, catching up in simple terms. Henry explained. He had family in town and had been traveling more carefully since that night. He said little about himself, and Jake didn't ask. Some people carried their stories quietly. As they talked, Emma approached their table, polite and professional, unaware of the connection between the two men. Henry watched her carefully, noting the way she moved, the tension in her shoulders, the way she apologized for things that weren't her fault. When Emma walked away, Henry leaned toward Jake. "She works very hard," he said. Jake nodded. "She does. May lose her job anyway." Henry's eyes darkened with concern. He asked questions about the diner, about the owner, about the community. Jake answered honestly, never realizing that every word was being carefully weighed. After finishing his meal, Henry asked for the check, then requested to speak with Mr. Harris. The owner came out, wary but polite, recognizing Henry as someone important, even if he didn't know why. Their conversation was quiet, private, stretching longer than expected. Emma stood behind the counter, biting her lip, convinced this was it. When Henry finally left, he paused at the door and looked back at Jake. "Kindness," he said softly, "has a way of finding its way home." Jake watched him go, confused but oddly hopeful. Moments later, Mr. Harris called Emma into the office. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron, every step heavy with dread. Minutes passed. Jake and Lily waited in silence. Finally, Emma emerged, tears streaming down her face. Jake's heart sank until she smiled. She rushed over and hugged Jake without thinking. "I still have my job," she said through sobs of relief. "He's investing in the diner, saving it. All of it." Jake looked toward the door Henry had exited, his mind spinning. He still didn't understand how or why, but deep down he felt it. The rain-soaked night was not finished with him yet, and this was only the beginning. After that afternoon at Rosie's diner, the town began to change in ways so subtle that most people didn't notice them at first. The closed soon feeling that had hung in the air slowly lifted. New paint appeared on the diner's exterior. The flickering neon sign was repaired, and fresh menus replaced the old stained ones. Word spread that a private investor had stepped in, but no one knew who he was. People only knew that Rosie's was staying open, and that alone felt like a small miracle. Emma returned to work with a different light in her eyes. She laughed more, stood straighter, and no longer jumped at every sharp word from the kitchen. Jake noticed how the fear had loosened its grip on her, and it reminded him how fragile stability really was. One day you were fine, the next you were begging for a chance to stay afloat. Henry Caldwell became a quiet presence in the diner, stopping by occasionally, never drawing attention to himself. He spoke kindly to everyone, listened more than he talked, and always left generous tips without ceremony. Jake and Henry spoke now and then, but Henry never mentioned the rain or the investment. It was as if he preferred the world, to move forward without dwelling on debts or gratitude. One evening, as Jake helped Lily with homework at their small kitchen table, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, Henry's calm voice greeted him. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "I was wondering if you might join me for coffee tomorrow." Jake hesitated, then agreed. They met at a quiet cafe the next afternoon. Henry arrived early, as always, and gestured for Jake to sit. After a few moments of small talk, Henry grew serious. He spoke about aging, about how life narrows when you least expect it, how independence can vanish in a single bad night. "That storm," he said, finally acknowledging it, "took more from me than you know. Not just my car, my confidence, my pride." Jake listened, unsure where this was leading. Henry then explained who he really was. He wasn't just an old man with a leather bag. He had once built a regional logistics company from nothing, sold it years ago and lived quietly since, watching the world move faster while he moved slower. Money, he said, had solved many problems, but never the loneliness that came with being invisible. "When you stopped," Henry said, his voice thick, "you reminded me that I still mattered." Jake swallowed hard. Henry slid a folder across the table. Inside were papers, numbers Jake barely understood. Henry wasn't offering charity. He was offering opportunity. He wanted Jake to manage a small local delivery operation who connected to his remaining business, interests, something stable, something with benefits and regular hours, a chance to be home for Lily more often. Jake's first instinct was to refuse. Pride rose up, sharp and defensive. But then he thought of Lily eating dinner alone some nights, of missed school events, of the constant fear that one breakdown away, everything could collapse. "I didn't help you for this," Jake said quietly. Henry smiled. "I know. That's why I'm offering." After days of sleepless thought, Jake accepted. Life shifted again, this time in a gentler direction. The new job didn't make him rich, but it gave him breathing room. Lily noticed first. Her father smiled more. He was home for dinner. He attended her school events. She slept better knowing he would be there when she woke up. Meanwhile, Rosie's diner became a hub of the community again. Emma was promoted to shift manager, her confidence growing with every decision she made. She began organizing food drives, free coffee mornings for seniors, and small acts of kindness that rippled outward. One evening, during a busy dinner rush, a woman burst into the diner in tears. Her car had broken down, her child was sick, and she had nowhere to go. Without hesitation, Emma offered her a seat, food, and help. Jake watched from a corner table, recognizing the moment for what it was. The circle was continuing. Henry, sitting quietly nearby, caught Jake's eye and nodded once, as if to say this was exactly the point. But not everyone was pleased. As the diner thrived, so did attention. A regional food chain began sniffing around, offering to buy the property, threatening competition. Mr. Harris felt the pressure, old fears resurfacing. Tension crept back in, subtle but dangerous. One night, Jake found Henry alone at the diner, staring out the window. "Kindness doesn't protect you from storms," Henry said softly. "It just gives you a reason to stand in them." Jake didn't fully understand then, but he would soon. Because the same forces that nearly destroyed Rosie's were gathering again, and this time saving a job would require more than one good man's generosity. It would require a community to remember who they were, and it would test whether kindness, once sparked, could truly survive when things got hard again. The trouble didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, the way most real problems do. At first, it was just rumors, whispers, that a large regional food chain wanted to buy the entire block where Rosie's diner stood. They promised renovation, jobs, modernization. Some people were tempted. Others were afraid. Mr. Harris, the aging owner, began losing sleep again. The diner had been saved once, but now it felt like history was threatening to repeat itself. One afternoon, a sharply dressed man came in, ordered a coffee he barely touched, and left his business card on the counter. The message was clear: sell now or be crushed later. Emma watched as Mr. Harris stared at the card with trembling hands. She felt that old fear return, the fear that no matter how hard you worked, someone with more power could erase everything. That night she stayed late, wiping already clean tables, trying to steady her thoughts. Jake noticed. "You're not going to lose this," he said quietly. Emma looked up, eyes shining. "How do you know?" Jake didn't answer right away. He looked around the diner, now full of people laughing, eating, living. Because it's not just a diner anymore. The next day, Henry Caldwell called a meeting. Not a boardroom meeting, a community meeting. Flyers went up around town. Social media posts spread. On a rainy evening, almost like the one that had started it all, people filled the diner, spilling onto the sidewalk outside. Truck drivers, teachers, single parents, retirees. People who had eaten there when they were broke. People who had celebrated birthdays there. People whose lives had quietly intersected within those walls. Henry stood near the counter, not elevated, not grand, just an old man with a steady voice. He spoke about value, not money value, but human value. He told them he could outbid the corporation, but he wouldn't unless the town wanted it. "This place survives," he said, "only if you believe it should." One by one, people spoke. A woman talked about how Emma once paid for her breakfast when she had nothing. A man admitted Rosie's had been the only warm place he had during a hard winter. A teenager said it was the first place he ever felt trusted with a job. Something shifted in the room. This wasn't about business anymore. It was about belonging. By the end of the night, a plan formed. Local suppliers partnered with the diner. Volunteers helped renovate for free. A cooperative agreement was created, protecting Rosie's from being sold without community approval. The corporation backed off, not because they lost money, but because they lost leverage. Emma cried that night, not from fear but relief. Mr. Harris hugged her like a daughter. Jake stood beside Henry, watching the crowd slowly disperse into the rain. "You started this," Jake said. Henry shook his head gently. "No, you did. I just reminded people." Months later, a small article appeared online. It talked about a diner that refused to disappear, about a town that chose people over profit. It mentioned an anonymous investor, a hard-working waitress, a single father who now volunteered weekends teaching kids basic auto repair. It didn't mention the rain-soaked roadside. It didn't mention the old pickup truck or the trembling old man. But Henry read it with a smile. Jake read it too, sitting at home with Lily curled beside him. "That's you," she said. Jake shook his head. "That's everyone. Life never became perfect. There were still bills, still bad days, still storms. But now, when rain fell hard against the pavement, Jake no longer saw it as a warning. He saw it as a reminder that stopping, just stopping, could change everything. That kindness didn't always come back as money or favors, but sometimes as time, stability, and the quiet knowledge that you mattered. And somewhere down the road, another tired person would see someone stranded, trembling, invisible. And maybe, because of this story, they would stop too. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that real kindness still exists, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel Kindness True Stories, where every story proves that small acts can create life-changing miracles. Thank you for believing in kindness.